Summer settled gently over the canyon. The rivers calmed. The grass turned gold beneath endless western skies. And for the first time since Clara Whitmore arrived there, life no longer felt temporary. Morning fires rose peacefully between the lodges while children chased one another beside the horse pens. The canyon breathed differently now. Safer. Clara noticed it most at night. Nobody checked the darkness constantly anymore. Nobody expected gunfire behind every wind gust. Even Takoda slept a little longer these days. Not much, but enough for Clara to notice. One early morning, she found him repairing tack beside the river before sunrise. The warrior sat quietly beneath cottonwood trees while pale orange light touched the canyon walls behind him. Clara carried 2 cups of cedar tea toward him. Takoda glanced up briefly. "You wake earlier now," he observed. Clara smiled faintly. "I stopped waking from nightmares." The words settled softly between them. Takoda lowered his eyes toward the leather straps in his hands, almost relieved, because every small sign of peace inside Clara mattered to him more than she understood. Clara sat beside him carefully. The river moved slowly nearby. For several minutes, neither spoke. And strangely, that had become her favorite kind of silence. The rider appeared near sunset. Alone, tall horse, that dust-covered coat, rifle across his saddle. The moment Takoda saw him, his entire body stiffened. Not fear, recognition. The stranger raised both hands slowly while approaching camp. "I came peaceful." Nobody trusted peaceful men on the frontier. Especially not Takoda. Clara noticed it immediately. The warrior's hand never moved far from his revolver. The rider finally stopped near the firelight. Older than Takoda, gray streaks in his hair, deep scars across one side of his neck. His eyes found Takoda first. Then quietly, "You disappeared a long time." Silence spread through camp. The older Comanche woman frowned softly. Nokosi. The name carried history. Old history. Takoda's jaw tightened slightly. Clara had seen that expression before. Usually before violence. Nokosi dismounted slowly. "I heard Crow finally died." Takoda answered flatly. "He did." Nokosi nodded once. Then his gaze shifted briefly toward Clara. "So this is why you stopped running." The canyon grew very still. Because everyone understood immediately. This man knew who Takoda used to be. And maybe, who he still could become. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The conversation beside the fire stayed trapped inside her thoughts. "You stopped running." The words followed her into darkness. She found Takoda alone near the horses sometime after midnight. Moonlight covered the canyon in silver shadows, while distant coyotes cried somewhere beyond the cliffs. Takoda brushed one of the horses quietly, slowly, like a man calming his own thoughts. "You knew him before Crow?" Clara asked softly. Takoda nodded once. Long silence. Then finally, "He fought beside my father." Clara waited. Takoda rarely offered pieces of himself freely. Every truth from him arrived carefully, like something dug from deep earth. "He wanted war after my brother died." The horse shifted gently beneath Takoda's hand. "I almost followed him." Clara looked toward him quietly. "But you didn't." Takoda stared into darkness. No, another long silence. Then finally, "Because revenge would have buried what remained of me too." The honesty in his voice hurt. Not weakness. Exhaustion. Clara stepped closer beside him. The canyon wind moved softly through cedar branches overhead. "You saved me instead," she whispered. Takoda's eyes lifted toward her slowly. And for one dangerous moment, the silence between them felt too full to survive words. Mado followed Takoda everywhere after Nokosi arrived. The child watched the older warriors carefully, studied how they moved, how they carried rifles, how they sat beside the fires. Children copied strength before understanding pain. One afternoon, Clara found Mado alone near the ridge trying to practice with a bow nearly taller than he was. The arrow barely traveled 6 feet before collapsing into the dirt. Mado groaned loudly. "I'll never be strong like Takoda." Clara smiled softly. Takoda wasn't born strong. Mado frowned. "He fights everybody." "No," Clara corrected gently. "He protects people." The difference mattered. She crouched beside the child. Carefully. Strong people aren't the ones who scare others. They're the ones who make others feel safe. Mado looked down quietly, thinking hard. Then finally, "Like you?" The question startled her. Months ago, Clara would have laughed sadly at the idea. Now, she wasn't so sure anymore. Because healing had changed her too. not into someone fearless, into someone who stayed kind despite fear. And maybe that was another kind of strength entirely. 3 nights later, the storm arrived. Violent wind tore across the canyon while lightning split the sky above the cliffs. The horses panicked immediately. Children cried inside the shelters. Rain hammered against stone hard enough to drown conversation. Then somewhere near the northern ridge, a gunshot echoed. The entire camp froze. Takoda moved instantly. Fast, precise, deadly calm. Nokosi grabbed his rifle beside the fire. Riders. Takoda listened carefully to the storm, then nodded once. Clara's stomach tightened instantly. Crow's men again. Or worse, someone new. Takoda crossed toward Clara quickly. Stay near the fires. Clara grabbed his sleeve before he turned away. The motion surprised both of them. For one brief moment, fear returned to her eyes. Not fear for herself. Fear of losing him. Takoda looked down toward her trembling hand, then quietly covered it with his own. Only briefly, but long enough. I'll come back. And before Clara could answer, the warrior disappeared into the storm. The attack came from the eastern ridge. 4 riders. Masked, armed, moving fast through rain and darkness. Nokosi fired first from behind the rocks near camp. Gunfire exploded across the canyon. Children screamed. Horses reared violently against their ropes. Clara helped move the younger children deeper into shelter while thunder shook the valley around them. Then she heard Maddo crying somewhere outside. Her blood turned cold instantly. The little boy stood near the horse pens trapped beside panicked animals. Lightning flashed overhead. One frightened horse snapped loose, kicking wildly. Without thinking, Clara ran directly into the storm. Clara! Someone shouted behind her. Too late. Mud swallowed her boots while rain blinded everything around her. Maddo froze in terror near the fence line. Clara reached him seconds before the horse crashed sideways into the posts. The fence shattered violently. Clara pulled the child beneath the rails just in time. Wood exploded above them. Maddo clung tightly to her coat, shaking uncontrollably. And in that moment, Clara realized something terrifying. She no longer risked herself because she wanted to survive. She risked herself because someone else mattered more. By dawn, the storm finally weakened. One rider remained alive. Takoda dragged him into camp, bleeding from the shoulder. The warrior's face looked colder than Clara had ever seen. Not rage. Something older. Personal. The wounded man laughed weakly through blood. Took you long enough, Takoda. Nokosi cursed softly under his breath. Clara immediately understood. This wasn't random. Takoda crouched beside the man slowly. You should have stayed south. The rider smiled painfully. Couldn't. Your ghost kept following us. Silence spread through camp. Then finally the truth emerged. Years earlier, before Clara ever met him, Takoda hunted outlaw gangs across frontier territory after his brother's death. Not for money. For revenge. This rider once rode beside the men Takoda buried. And now, the past had finally found the canyon. Later that night, Clara found Takoda alone beyond the river. The warrior sat motionless beneath dark cedar trees while moonlight reflected softly across the water. You should sleep, Clara said quietly. Takoda never looked up. I know men like him. Clara stepped closer. You stopped them. Takoda's jaw tightened slightly. For now. The words felt heavy. Final. Clara slowly sat beside him on the cold stones. You think more are coming. Takoda finally looked toward her. Yes. Honest. Again, always honest. Clara studied his face carefully. The exhaustion there frightened her more than violence ever had. Because this man carried responsibility like punishment. For the canyon, for the tribe, for her. You don't have to carry everything alone, Clara whispered. Takoda stared toward the river silently. Then after a long moment, I do not know how to stop. And Clara realized something heartbreaking. The warrior who taught her how to heal never learned how to heal himself. The canyon felt quieter after the attack. Not peaceful, watchful. Children stayed closer to the fires. Warriors rode farther from camp before sunset. Even the wind seemed careful moving through the cliffs. Maddo barely left Clara's side all morning. Finally, the child asked softly, will the bad men come back? Clara looked toward Takoda sharpening his knife near the riverbank. Then toward Nokosi speaking quietly with the elders. Fear remained everywhere. But so did something else now. People standing together. Clara touched the child's shoulder gently. Maybe. Maddo lowered his eyes. Then Clara continued, "But we won't face them alone." The boy looked up slowly, and somewhere nearby, Takoda heard every word. That evening, Clara sat alone beside the central fire. The camp slowly drifted toward sleep around her. Only Takoda remained awake somewhere beyond the ridge. Watching, protecting, always protecting. Clara stared into the flames quietly. Months ago, fire meant fear to her. Crow, locked rooms, violence waiting outside doors. Now fire meant something entirely different. Warmth, belonging, people waiting for one another to come home safely. The transformation stunned her sometimes. Then footsteps approached from darkness. Takoda. Mud still covered his boots from patrol beyond the canyon. Without speaking, he sat beside the fire near her. Clara handed him warm cedar tea automatically. The smallness of the gesture felt strangely intimate. Like muscle memory. Takoda accepted it quietly. Then after a long silence, "You waited awake." Clara looked toward the flames. "Yes." Takoda stared at her for several seconds. And something inside the warrior softened visibly. Because maybe nobody had ever waited for him before. Summer deepened across the frontier. Wildflowers appeared beside the rivers. Warm winds replaced the cold mountain air. And slowly, the canyon began breathing easier again. One afternoon, Clara and Takoda repaired fishing nets beside the water while Maddo slept nearby beneath cottonwood shade. Peaceful moments still surprised Clara. Not because they were rare anymore. Because she finally trusted they might last. Takoda tied another knot carefully into the netting. Then quietly, "You do not look toward the road anymore." Clara smiled faintly. "I noticed." The river moved softly around the stones nearby. Takoda lowered his hand slowly. "When you first arrived, I thought you would disappear by spring." Clara looked toward him. "But I stayed." Takoda nodded once. And though his face barely changed, his eyes did. That dangerous silence returned again. The kind carrying too much feeling inside it. Clara's pulse quickened softly. Because both of them understood now. This was no longer merely survival. It had become love. Quiet, patient, terrifying, and neither knew how to speak it aloud yet. Late that night, Clara stood alone above the canyon ridge. Stars covered the frontier sky endlessly, while river water shimmered far below like silver beneath moonlight. Takoda approached quietly beside her. Neither spoke for a while. They didn't need to anymore. Finally, Clara whispered, "I used to think home was where people kept you." Takoda listened silently. She looked toward the fires glowing gently below them. "Now I think home is where people let you stay." The wind moved softly through the canyon. Takoda's eyes lowered briefly toward her hand resting against the stone beside him. Then carefully, very carefully, his fingers touched hers. Not possession, not control. Choice. Clara closed her eyes slowly. And for the first time in her entire life, touch no longer felt like fear. Below them, the canyon slept peacefully beneath summer stars while distant horses shifted softly near the riverbanks. And beside the warrior who once saved her from a blizzard, Clara Whitmore finally understood something beautiful. Some people survive because they escape. Others survive because, at last, they find somewhere gentle enough to remain. Autumn arrived quietly over the canyon. The cottonwood leaves turned gold beside the river, while colder winds drifted through the cliffs each evening. Summer had softened everyone, even Takoda. The warriors still rode patrols. The camp still prepared carefully for danger. But laughter returned easier now, especially around Clara. One morning, she stood beside the cooking fires teaching several children how to bake bread the way her mother once taught her years ago. Flour dust covered Maddo's face completely. The little boy looked offended when everyone laughed, including Takoda. That surprised Clara most. Takoda rarely laughed loudly. His smiles appeared quietly, briefly, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. But lately, they appeared more often around her. Maddo crossed his arms dramatically. "It wasn't my fault." Clara tried to stop smiling. "You poured too much water." "No, I didn't. You flooded the bowl." Takoda finally spoke from beside the fire. The bowl nearly drowned. The entire camp laughed harder. Maddo looked betrayed. Clara nearly choked, trying not to laugh herself. And for one strange moment, the canyon felt less like survivors hiding from the world, and more like a family forgetting fear long enough to live. That night, the temperature dropped sharply. Cold wind rolled through the canyon, while everyone gathered closer beside the central fires. Clara sat wrapped in blankets near the flames while older women repaired winter clothing beside her. Months ago, she never stayed this close to people. Healing had changed even that. The older Comanche woman glanced toward her quietly. You stop watching the exits now. Clara looked surprised. I used to do that. The woman smiled sadly. All wounded animals do. The sentence stayed inside Clara long after the conversation ended. Because it was true. Back in Deadwood, back with Crow, every room felt dangerous. Every silence felt temporary. Every kindness felt like debt waiting to be collected later. But here, nobody punished her for existing. Nobody raised voices to control her. Nobody touched her without permission. The fire cracked softly between them. Then Clara realized something strange. She no longer sat near warmth because she was cold. She sat near it because she finally trusted it. Across the flames, Takoda watched her quietly. And somewhere deep inside himself, the warrior understood he no longer feared losing solitude. Because the canyon no longer felt empty with her inside it. The black Mustang arrived injured near sunrise. Wild-eyed, bleeding, terrified. Two young hunters struggled desperately to hold the animal still beside the riverbank. But every time Takoda approached, the horse kicked violently. Easy, he muttered calmly. The Mustang nearly bit his arm. Clara approached slowly from behind the trees. The moment the horse saw her, its panic changed. Still frightened, but listening. Takoda stepped back immediately. Not offended. Observing. Clara removed her gloves carefully before moving closer. No ropes, no force. Just patience. The horse trembled violently beneath morning light. Clara understood that kind of fear too well. She rested one gentle hand near the animal's neck. Nobody's hurting you. The Mustang slowly lowered its head. Takoda watched silently. Then finally Nokosi spoke nearby. It trusts her. Clara smiled faintly. No, it just knows I understand. The words settled deeply into Takoda's chest. Because for the first time, he realized Clara no longer survived the canyon. She belonged to it completely now. Several nights later, Clara sat alone beneath lantern light, writing carefully inside a small notebook. Takoda noticed immediately. You write often now. Clara closed the journal halfway. Only when my thoughts become too loud. Takoda sat beside the fire nearby sharpening arrows. Long silence. Then Clara finally admitted. I keep trying to write to my mother. Takoda looked up quietly. But I never finish. The canyon wind moved softly through the darkness. Clara stared down at unfinished words across the page. I survived, that I'm safe, that I found people who treat me kindly. Simple sentences. Yet somehow impossible to send. Because part of Clara still feared something painful. What if the people she loved before the canyon never truly knew her at all? Takoda studied her face carefully. Then quietly. Some people only understand us after we leave. Clara looked toward him slowly. And some never do. The honesty hurt. But it also freed something inside her. Because maybe healing wasn't becoming understood by everyone. Maybe it was finally understanding yourself. Clara slowly closed the journal. Then moved beside the fire closer to Takoda than usual. Neither commented on it. But both noticed. The snow arrived earlier than expected that year. By dawn, white frost covered the canyon trails. Takoda returned from patrol near midday with blood across one sleeve. The entire camp stood immediately. Clara's chest turned cold. What happened? Takoda removed his coat slowly. Nothing serious. Lie. Clara saw pain flash across his face the moment he moved his shoulder. A bullet graze. Too close. The older women prepared hot water while Nokosi cursed under his breath nearby. More riders. Takoda nodded once. Scouts. Fear spread quietly through camp again. But Clara barely heard any of it. Because for the first time since meeting Takoda, she saw exhaustion stronger than strength inside him. Not physical exhaustion. Emotional. Like the warrior understood danger would keep following him forever. That night, Clara found him alone beside the ridge line. Snow drifted softly around the cliffs. You should rest, she whispered. Takoda stared toward the mountains. If they find this canyon, he never finished the sentence. He didn't need to. Clara stepped closer slowly. Then very carefully, she touched his injured arm. Takoda froze slightly. Not from pain. From surprise. Because nobody took care of men like him. They depended on them, followed them, needed them. But very few people ever asked who protected the protector. Clara looked directly into his tired eyes. We protect each other now. And for the first time, Takoda looked afraid to lose something. Mato asked the question 3 days later. Children always noticed truths adults tried hiding. The little boy sat beside Clara repairing fishing hooks badly, while Takoda worked nearby with Nokosi. Then suddenly, "Are you two married?" Silence exploded across the fire. Nokosi immediately looked away, trying not to laugh. Takoda nearly stabbed straight through the leather strap in his hands. Clara blinked rapidly. Mato frowned. "What?" The child looked genuinely confused. "You always wait for each other. You sit together. You worry when the other leaves." Nokosi finally stood abruptly. "I suddenly remember work elsewhere," and disappeared immediately. Clara's face burned hotter than the fire beside them. Takoda remained completely still, dangerously still. Finally Clara whispered, "No, Mato." The child nodded thoughtfully. Then, "Oh, so not yet." Takoda coughed violently into his hand. Clara stared directly into the flames, trying not to smile. And for the rest of the evening, neither of them looked at each other for too long. Winter settled harder across the frontier. But something inside the canyon had changed permanently now. People noticed it everywhere. Takoda spent less time riding alone. Clara laughed easier. Mato stopped asking whether she would leave. Even Nokosi eventually muttered quietly, "You look less haunted." Takoda ignored him completely, which usually meant the statement was true. One evening, Clara found Takoda carving wood beside the fire after patrol. "What is that?" she asked softly. Takoda hesitated briefly, then handed her the carving. A wolf, carefully shaped by rough hands. Clara stared at it silently. "You made this?" Takoda nodded once. "For Mato." But Clara noticed something important. The carving looked almost identical to the first wolf she helped Mato finish months ago. Takoda remembered small things, quiet things. The realization warmed her chest unexpectedly. Then Takoda added quietly, "He sleeps easier when you are here." Clara lowered her eyes. "So do I." The silence afterward changed everything. The rider arrived near dusk beneath falling snow. Alone, armed, dangerous, Takoda recognized him immediately. So did Nokosi. The warrior's name was Elon. Former outlaw, former hunter. One of the last surviving men Takoda once hunted after his brother's death. Elon dismounted slowly near the canyon entrance. "I came to settle something old." Takoda stepped forward immediately. No simple answer. But Elon's eyes shifted toward Clara, standing near the fires. "You built yourself a peaceful little life." Hatred moved beneath every word. Because some men could not survive watching others heal from pain they themselves never escaped. Elon smiled bitterly. "You think love makes you weak now?" Takoda's expression hardened instantly. No, but Clara saw the truth immediately. Love did make him vulnerable. Because now he had people to lose. The confrontation happened after midnight. Snow fell heavily through the canyon while most of the camp slept. Clara woke to voices near the ridge. Takoda, Elon, both standing beneath moonlight with rifles nearby. Old ghosts, old violence. Elon's voice carried anger sharpened by years. "You buried everyone. You think you deserve peace afterward?" Takoda answered quietly. No, the honesty stunned even Elon briefly. Then Clara stepped forward from the darkness. Takoda turned immediately. "You should not be here." But Clara kept walking. Because months ago, she learned something important. Men destroyed themselves when nobody stood between them and pain. She stopped beside Takoda carefully, then looked directly at Elon. He already suffered enough. Elon laughed coldly. "So did we." Clara nodded slowly. "Yes." Then quietly. "But pain that keeps spreading only creates more graves." Snow drifted silently between them. And for one long moment, nobody reached for a weapon. By sunrise, Elon finally lowered his rifle. Not because he lost, because he was tired. Takoda understood that exhaustion better than anyone alive. The warrior stepped closer carefully. "You can stay until the storm passes." Nokosi looked horrified. Even Clara stared quietly. But Takoda's face never changed. Mercy. Again. Not weakness. Strength controlled carefully. Elon looked toward the canyon fires, toward children sleeping safely, toward people surviving together instead of apart. And something inside him cracked slightly. Because men who lived too long beside violence often forgot gentleness still existed anywhere. Takoda finally turned away first, trusting Elon not to shoot him in the back. That trust stunned everyone most of all. especially Elon himself. Later that evening, the storm finally calmed. Clara sat beside the river watching snow fall softly into dark water. Takoda approached quietly beside her. For several minutes, only the river spoke. Then Clara whispered, "You always choose mercy, even when nobody chose it for you." Takoda looked toward the canyon lights. "My father believed anger should protect life, not consume it." Clara studied him carefully. Then slowly, she reached for his hand. First, no feared, and oh hesitation. Takoda's fingers closed gently around hers. Warm, careful, certain, the canyon wind moved softly through the trees. And for the first time, neither of them pulled away. The first deep winter snow arrived 2 nights later. The canyon turned white beneath moonlight, while smoke rose peacefully from the fires below. Clara stood beside Takoda near the ridge watching snow settle across the sleeping camp. Everything looked softer beneath winter. Even old pain. Mato's laughter echoed faintly from one of the shelters nearby. Somewhere below, Nokosi argued with the older women over burned stew again. Life. Simple. Ordinary. Beautiful. Clara leaned gently against Takoda's shoulder. The movement felt natural now, like something her heart learned long before her mind accepted it. Takoda looked down toward her quietly. "You are cold." "I'm fine." "Lie." Takoda removed his blanket calmly and wrapped it around both of them anyway. Clara smiled softly into the fabric, then finally whispered the truth she once feared most. "I don't want another life anymore." Takoda's eyes closed briefly. Not relief. Something deeper. Home. Below them, the canyon slept safely beneath snow and firelight. And beside the warrior who once rescued her from chains and winter storms. Clara Whitmore finally understood something beautiful. Real love did not feel like captivity. It felt like peace beside a fire you no longer feared would disappear by morning.